Yeah, can proceed.
Okay, great. So this last item, it's really going to be a class activity. I'm sure people are almost tired of listening to me speak for the past hour. So this is going to be an activity. And for this, we are looking at other ways of modifying our SIR model. So this is what I want us to do. So in the next 15 minutes, I would want us to draw the compartmental model for these models here. That's the SI model, SIS model, SIRS model, SEAIR model. Then also think about an example of a disease where these models may be applicable and what assumptions we are making using these models. And we have 15 minutes to work on that. And my hope is at the end of 15 minutes, we'll have about 2 people who would share their screen and show us their results of this. Does that sound good? Any question? Okay, so it seems there's no question. I'll start my timer now. Yeah, so from now to 4:25. Abel, are we doing good on time?
Yes, we are doing well on time.
Okay, great. So let's take 15 minutes to work on this, then reconvene to respond to the answers. Thank you.
Sylvia, I've sent you a small email.
Okay, let me check it.
Excuse me, Dr. Slivia, could you kindly share your screen again where the question is? There we go.
Oh, sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, we have about 6 minutes more.
Yeah. That's okay. Success.
Okay, just a minute more. Okay, time's up. Anyone willing to share? I think we should be able to wrap this up in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Gabriel? Gabriel, Ibrahim, Mishabi, John, anyone need to respond to this?
I think let me just share. I did 2 of them.
Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Let me see. This is what I did. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
I did one for COVID-19,
Okay.
where you're susceptible, you get infected. When you recover, you can still get susceptible after recovery. So I used COVID-19. Then I did one for HIV/AIDS, where when you're susceptible, you get infected and there's no recovery. So I did those 2. Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you, Brian. Anyone else to share? Victoria? We have Denise, Gabriel, Ibrahim, John, Caroline, Praskovia, Nixon, Noah, Robert, Victoria, Winnie.
Let me share.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Maybe in a couple of seconds. Okay, you see your screen now.
Okay, so for me, modeling malaria. So someone can be susceptible and then they become infected with malaria through the mosquitoes, and then they recover, but still they can be infected by the mosquitoes again and then get malaria again. So they are susceptible again. Yeah, that's my model.
Thank you so much, Praskovia. I think we have time for one more person, then we quickly wrap up. John, would you like to take the last one?
Sorry, I'm not in a position to share. I'm using my.
Okay. I will share my screen then, John. Then you could just let us know, for example, what diseases you think would fall under any of these compartments. So if you're looking at an SIR model, what's an example of disease that would, I think Brian mentioned HIV. Aside HIV, is there anything else that could come to mind? I'm not missing any.
Okay, I don't know. I'm thinking about one of the zoonotic, for example, it fever. It can also follow the.
Sorry, I can't quite.
Okay, I'm thinking about one of the zoonotic diseases, for example, either rabies or Rift Valley fever. It can follow the SIR model. For example, the Rift Valley fever is transmitted by the mosquitoes. So susceptible people are people who are maybe close proximity to areas where we have these vectors, and once they are bitten or during the usual blood meal for these mosquitoes, they now transition to being infectious. And once they're able to get the prophylactic, they can be able to recover from the same. But again, as because they don't get lifetime immunity against the same, we can have an arrow going back from the recovered compartment now back to the susceptible, and we can have the respective mathematics for explaining the rate of change of each of the particular compartments.
Okay, great. Who asked about incorporating the asymptomatic compartment into the model? I think someone asked it in the first lecture.
Yeah, I think I asked that about the asymptomatic individuals. Maybe I can just say something also about the same. We can have prior to having, now we can 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can have 5 compartments. So the first one will be the susceptible individuals. So so the arrow goes from susceptible to exposed to asymptomatic to infectious, then recovered. So for the susceptible individuals are the entire population that are at risk of getting malaria. Then the exposed, for example, these are people who are living close to, let's say, I'll give an example of Kenya because that's what I'm conversant with. So let's say people who are close to water bodies because there is a higher likelihood of interacting with the mosquito vectors that have the parasite Plasmodium falciparum. Then they will now become, they are now exposed because they can be bitten by the mosquitoes. And depending, once they are bitten, they can have a lower parasitemia of Plasmodium in their blood, such that, yes, they are infective, but they are not clinically presenting. So they will also, we will have a compartment, separate compartment for the asymptomatics, because yes, if you check their blood and let's say do microscopy or molecular-based assays, will be able to detect Plasmodium, but they are not presenting with malaria symptoms. So, but once the parasitemia really multiplies in their blood, and now they're able now to move from being asymptomatic to infectious. But maybe a question also on this, because asymptomatics are also infectious. So I don't know how that will be represented mathematically, because in any case they can also transmit the disease. And now back to my flow, from asymptomatic they become infectious when the parasitemia is high enough to present clinically, and once they're given interventions, for example, the RCTs, I can't remember the exact numbers. Once they're given drugs against malaria, they recover. But even if they recover, they still have the probability of being infected again if a mosquito that has the Plasmodium parasite bites them again. So that is the model that I can think of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And I think you mentioned how the asymptomatic compartment would be accounted for in the transmission dynamics, right? So remember in the previous models, the SIR models, and that was a question that Proscovia had asked about. Looking at the force of infection, we only had the infectious compartment, individuals in the infectious compartment being able to transmit to the susceptible individuals. So we only had that one compartment contributing to the force of infection. So if you're assuming that asymptomatic individuals also drive the transmission process, then you would need to account for that in your force of infection. So instead of having only I in that force of infection, you would have to add the asymptomatic compartment as well. And to add more complexity to that, you probably need to ask yourself if asymptomatic individuals are as infectious as symptomatic individuals, then probably introduce a scaling factor if that's not your interest. So that's to respond to that comment. And my last question for the day before I sign off it.
Actually, Sylvia, maybe before you ask.
Okay.
Yeah, there is something that Robert, I think it was John Kiru, who he mentioned something and it caught my attention, and we have a similar thing in one of the compartmental models we are building. The contribution of a vector. I don't know whether Mongao Stephen is on the call, but in a part of the question they are asking, we are trying to look at the malaria transmission, but we're trying to factor in the contribution of a vector. So do we have a vector as one of the compartments, or we constitute it after we bring it under the infectious compartment?
Okay, great. So for the malaria, first of all, it's really not fun to model because, like you said, if you are looking at the vector population, then you need to account for that in your model. So usually for malaria models, you have a model for the humans and then that for the vectors to account for the process occurring in both the human and the vector groups. So for example, if you're looking at the human population, you may have your SIS model or SIRS model just for the humans. And then you have a similar model for the vector. But then you will need to incorporate how contacts between the two would influence the transmission process. So you may have to add an arrow from an infectious mosquito to a susceptible individual and account for the biting rate, like how many times the susceptible individual will need to be bitten to become infected with the parasites. Then you can also account for the rate at which the susceptible, the infectious human being, a person with the malaria parasites would also transmit to like the mosquito. That is like when a mosquito bites an infectious person, it gets introduced and gets injected with the plasmodium parasite. So it's quite complicated. And again, it really depends on your understanding of the natural history of malaria if you want to incorporate that. But there are a lot of models on that. And I would suggest that you look up Caroline Bucky. She does a lot of work on mathematical modeling of malaria. So that would help you with building the model for malaria. But yes, you probably need two separate models, one for humans, one for the mosquito, and come up with arrows of how they contact each other for the transmission to go on.
Sorry, thank you so much for responding to that question, but maybe just to do an extension of that. If, for example, my objective is to understand, let's say, a multifaceted approach. For example, I have the humans, I also have the vector, but I also want to understand, sorry about the noise. I also want to understand, let's say, how geographical parameters, for example, the altitude, the temperatures, and geographical, geographical parameters. Will all these have different independent models that we now bring them together, or how do I deal with this complexity so that I'm able to understand in a holistic approach how all these factors influence to malaria transmission? Thank you.
Okay, great. So to respond to that, there are ways of incorporating complexity into your model. So first off, you don't always have to add different compartments. Sometimes all you have to do is to make certain assumptions about the parameter values that you are using. So if you want to introduce a complexity but make your model structure as simple as possible, then you may probably modify the parameters of your model. So for the environmental factors, right? So you have so if you're looking at the model for the mosquito, you have, let's say, the susceptible for the mosquito. And then you assume that, okay, you have good environmental conditions that would cause more mosquitoes to be birthed in the population, for lack of better words. So then that means you may introduce an arrow or just a parameter directed towards the susceptible population where these environmental conditions are contributing to an increase in the susceptible population. So there you will not need a compartment. But then if you also decide to track a certain the impact of certain variables, then you may need to introduce like a new box to track that. Does that answer your question? So it really depends on the question you are trying to answer and how much complexity you want to introduce. But whatever parameter or interventions that you would want to incorporate in the model would really depend on the type of question you're answering and the expertise of the individuals working on it.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, great. So my last question is, well, under what circumstance would you use the SIS model instead of the SIRS model? Can you give me an example of when we would want to use the SIS model instead of the SIRS model, or the other way around?
I beg your, Sylvia, I beg your pardon. You're asking under what circumstance do we use the third model instead of the second model?
Yes, or the other way around, or the second model instead of the third model.
My opinion is it would still depend on the disease epidemiology. Some diseases, after recovery, you may not slide back into susceptibility. Whereas some diseases, immediately you recover, you become susceptible.
Okay, so can you give an example again of it, like one common disease that once you recover, you become immediately susceptible, and another one that when you recover,
COVID-19 is one, or those influenzas, diseases like that. Once you recover, you immediately become susceptible.
did the literature change on that? Because I thought it's once you recover from COVID-19, it took about, on average, about 3 to 6 months to become susceptible. Yeah, so
Oh
then
yeah,
for
you
that,
become susceptible. Maybe you don't become susceptible immediately, but with time you
exactly.
become susceptible. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, so that will fall under the SIRS model. But however, for a disease like gonorrhea, if you get treated for gonorrhea today and you become exposed to it, you can immediately, you get treated for gonorrhea today, you can immediately become susceptible to it, such that when you get exposed, you get infected with gonorrhea. Okay, thank you. I think that's all from me, Abel.
Yes, I just want to request one of the members to give a vote of thanks to you ahead of, I know shall have you again on, is it Wednesday or Thursday?
I think Thursday.
Thursday. Brian, do you want to give a vote of thanks to our facilitator?
Yes, Abel. On behalf of my colleagues, I would like to thank you, Sylvia, for this lecture. We are really grateful and we have learned a lot from you. I pray we'll meet again in other endeavors. Thank you so much for this lecture.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thanks to everyone for helping us have like a very interactive session. And I look forward to coming back on Thursday. Have a good day, rest of the day, everyone.